So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's AIAA Los Angeles Las Vegas section. Very special meeting. Today we have very special guest, and you will learn a lot from her, and it's very exciting, both for women's professional career and also for aerospace cybersecurity. She has got a great experience. And now I introduce our moderator and lead today, Miss Mary Wheaton. She is our AIAA Fellow, Aerospace Corporation. Welcome, Mary Lee. So go ahead. You stop. This one is bad.
Alrighty. Yes, I want to give a warm welcome to Jennifer, Colonel K today. She's had a very long and distinguished career in the Air Force, 27 years, just recently retired, and now is Chief Executive Officer for Plan Z, which I'm sure we'll hear about. But in her career at the Air Force, she did space as well as aircraft assignments, as well as also assignments related to Joint Chief of Staff. I think what she really became famous for, and one of her next to last jobs, was a software factory that she did for called Kobayashi Maru, which really helped SSC become much more agile in the development of their system. So it was a big deal, a real contribution to SSC, and really helped them in terms of ensuring that they could more quickly be resilient, support the warfighter, that type of thing. And then the final job that she had was as the Chief Information Officer for Space Systems too. So obviously very responsible job. So we're really delighted to have her here and to hear her talks. Thank you, Jennifer.
Much, Marilee. I really appreciate it. So I like to have things be a bit more interactive and kind of a conversation as they go through. Only because part of it is like I'd like to hear what you would like to hear about, not just me pontificating forever. Totally can do. But what I'll kind of do, what I thought could be interesting place to start is kind of walk through my career, kind of getting on some of the topic Ken was asking about, like women's perspective, but just even like all of the things I learned and how it all culminated, where the cybersecurity piece kind of came into play, and why throughout my career seeing the pitfalls of why security wasn't necessarily taken advantage of, like how we can like do that sort of thing better. It kind of weaves into the whole thing and stuff too. So as Marilee said, I'm actually kind of weird from a lot of acquisition professionals in the military. I've done probably every mission thread that's out there in the Air Force and Space Force, which is not usually very common. It's typically like you're in space, or you're in aircraft, or you're in whatever. So when I started out as a second lieutenant, I actually I graduated from the University of Dayton, go Flyers, with a mechanical engineering degree. So I am a geek by trade. I love it. I love tech. I love all of that sort of thing. The wicked problems you could throw at is cool and awesome. I love it. And joined the military primarily to pay for college, because that was the only way I was going to be able to get there. So my first assignment, lo and behold, Wright Pat Air Force Base, going very far away. They put me in the it was Wright Labs at the time, so I am dating myself a little tiny bit, in the Materials and Manufacturing Directorate. And at the time, it was in the plans and office. Second lieutenant, you're kind of like, I don't even know what I'm planning or programming for, so I don't even know anything yet and why am I in this office. But made the best out of it as I could there. But I always decided to, like, hey, I want to go get my master's, and I had thought about going to AFIT and whatnot. And but I was also, I don't know why, but I was a little scared at the time, because I was like, hey, can I get in? Can I hack grad school? All this, that, and the other. So I actually found there was a Dayton Area Graduate Studies Institute. It was like a consortium between multiple different universities within Ohio there, with like AFIT, OSU, Wright State, UD, UC, all those kind of guys, and they would give scholarships to folks. And so, so I applied because like, hey, I'll go part-time to AFIT. My boss, signed off that I could, get out of work for a class or two, and then go that way and kind of build up what I was doing, and then apply for AFIT for real, like the following year sort of thing as part of the traditional AFIT program. Well, DAXI came back and they gave me a full ride, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. So I went to my boss and I'm like, hey, can I do this? And he's like, if you can find a way, go for it. And I found a way. I actually found a loophole in one of the regs that let me go full time to AFIT while I was still assigned to my old job. And I bring this story because it actually, I didn't really realize it or think about it until much later in my life. And when I was doing some of these kind of discussions of, I always would find a way to get something done. I would always work to like, how do you get to something to yes? Or how do you like figure out how to overcome something when it's something that you want to do, like all of those kinds of pieces and parts. So this was kind of like the first instance of that. And it was very rewarding. So obviously I went to AFIT, got my master's in aeronautical engineering, and went forward from there. So kind of the first step of that sort of thing. So I wanted to get into test because that's kind of the closest thing you can do in engineering in the government. And so I actually tried to go to Edwards because there was doing some cool stuff back then with the F-22. Was just kind of getting out there, and actually had people who wanted to pull me out there, but in the wisdom of the Air Force, they sent me down to Barksdale Air Force Base to do OT&E on the B-52s. Cool kind of a mission, good sort of stuff going on. The problem was that the missiles that I was responsible for didn't have any funding for that particular year. So for a whole year, I had nothing to do whatsoever. That is not good with me. I know I'm like a person that needs to kind of keep gainfully employed and stuff. But the office and the organization I was also in was very toxic. So not only did I have nothing to do and was making me like my eyeballs bleed in that respect, but the environment that I was in was not a very growing kind of organization. To the and I bring that one up because it was, I actually almost got out. There was a couple few times where I was like, I can't handle this. This is not for me at all. And the biggest thing though that I was taking away from there is what people are. Because I'm from the Midwest, we're typically really nice to each other. We like to, everybody, I like to think of myself as a nice person. Most people do like me for, most intents and purposes. And to see people who were like undermining or who were openly hostile or who would try and just take you down sort of thing, it was kind of a bit of a wake-up call. But it was also like, I don't want to run an organization like that. I don't want to be around people and tolerate people who are like that. And so that actually helped shape and form a lot of the way I would communicate with folks, just in talking with them and what that looked like. And just again, like who I wanted to be and how I wanted to be when I grew up. So obviously I did decide to stay in. I told my then husband that I married him to get out of Barksdale because I was able to do a joint spouse and come here to Los Angeles the first time. So I was here from 2001 to 2005, working on GPS was the one that I had in there. And I was lead engineer for the nuclear detonation detection system. So I was, pretty excited about that. I got to do some engineering sorts of things again. One of the interesting things I realized then too was how my brain works differently than a lot of other people, because I was getting into program management stuff as well. And people who were, more business or degree-esque or oriented that way had different views of how they looked at life or how they looked at a problem than me and my engineering brain did. So kind of realizing and understanding like you need that diversity of thought as you're gathering information about different projects or what's going on to be able to synthesize all that together to be able to ultimately make your decision and go after your program. So it's kind of an interesting sort of realization myself, because I always thought everybody thought like I did, because I'm in my head all the time. Why aren't you guys? So With that though, I ended up becoming the exec for GPS. I was there for about a year doing that. And then I went and worked on GPS 3 when that one first started in there about a year after I did my exec time. I actually worked the whole acquisition for phase B when they were trying to go to GPS, and I'm like dating myself a huge year. This is the first time they tried to go to milestone B in that respect. And I got a real appreciation for the process of acquisition and on all of the steps that you needed to take and whatnot that was in there. The most defeating thing though was that when we went to the decision authority and like, I want you to scrap all of the work you just did and break it up into chunks. And I'm like, okay, huge mistake, because we already had all of the money in place. We already had the whole schedule. We had the contractors on board. We had everything that would go through it. And that one decision that he made stalled the program for at least 5 to 7 years. Because of all of the rework that had to do, the reestablishing of money that had to happen, all of that sort of stuff. Again, a very important kind of lesson on people. And that's one thing that the acquisition, they always talk cost, schedule, performance. But there's a couple of other elements that people don't add to that listing. That's also very important with acquisition. And one of that is people. If you can't get the people in and aligned and on board, it really almost doesn't matter all the rest of the stuff that you have. That is the one of the big key elements that they don't really teach a lot of program managers. How do you get all the people together to be on the same sort of page? So from there, I became the staff director for GPS up at the PEO level. And had a really good time with that as well too. Got to see like the bigger picture across the whole portfolio of things that went on. But it was also starting to be like, I can't hold a job more than a year. So like, okay, that's good. But I got to learn how to be like really quick, getting up to speed, how to get in to analyze a system, a problem, an issue, and how do you get after solving it quickly, because you don't know how long you're necessarily going to be in that organization. From that point, so my whole experience with GPS and what we were doing there, I knew I wanted to be they called them SPDs at the time, senior material leader is what they call them now. I wanted to be in charge of a big program like that, and do those kinds of things and make a real impact on that kind of life. So, but from that, one of the jobs that everybody needs to have is to be a PEM, or at least that's a good succession. A PEM is a person out in the Pentagon who advocates for the program in the DC area of responsibility, goes to battle, all that kind of stuff. And they were actually pushing me to be a PEM in GPS. I'd be one of the junior PEMs because I was only a captain still, which is usually unheard of that anybody goes there as a captain. But the 06 that was in charge of GPS and all of those guys were like, hey, yes, we want Jen out there. She already knows the program. She'd be a great asset, all this on the other. But again, in the great wisdom of the Air Force, I got assigned to the National Security Space Institute instead in Colorado Springs. Needless to say, I was a little like, well, that's kind of interesting. But it actually turned out to be really, really good for a couple of different reasons. One, it gave me the opportunity to be an instructor. So I taught acquisition, space acquisition, what all that meant in there, space 200, space 300, all of that sort of thing. But I was also head of the advanced navigation operations class, the coursework that was there. So I taught acquisition, but I also taught GPS, and then I taught this. I was head of the navigation course. And it was actually another kind of funny thing. When I was only there for interim to be the head of the NavOps course, because they had somebody from TUSOPS operator type who was going to come in because operators know everything, right? And so they're going to be there and they're going to be able to teach and all this, that, and the other. Well, it turns out the guy that they had identified, he came and he took the course, which makes sense, so he could understand what his students would be going through, and he failed. He failed first test. They recycled him. He failed it again. They tried to do it a third time, and they're just like, no, this isn't going to work. And so then they were like, Jen, you know this stuff. I'm like, yeah, how do you know this is an acquisition? It's like, it's my job to know this stuff. It's not just about my job to know like how the tech is and how it's better. Are you guys using it? How do I make it better for you? I need to know your end of the world and stuff too. So starting to try and give people an appreciation for the career field that is program management. We have to know way more than just the tech. You have to know the contracts, you have to know the finance, you have to know the business side, you have to know the operations side, you have to know the industry side, the politics, and all of those things in a weave. And that's one of the things when it was kind of first hitting me, like, I love this kind of work. And it's not just about the tech. And yes, I love the tech, and there's wicked problems with the tech, but acquisition in of itself is a huger wicked problem. And that, to bring all of those pieces and parts together, fascinating to me, much more than just, focusing on the hardware and bits and pieces. So the with that, then, so I was at that in there. They graduated me up to the deputy for the mission directorate, so that basically supporting the whole school, things like that. But one of the big pieces and parts, that was why it was beneficial, or in the cosmos, for me to be in Colorado, is when I had my kids. So I had twins while I was in Colorado. They're now 16. It's kind of crazy for me to realize that. But they, I don't think I would have had them if I had become a PEM in DC. So it's kind of interesting the way that your life weaves through, and you're set up in places to be where you're supposed to be at those times. So I have never worked another assignment in my life, even though I tried to do it twice and it failed miserably both times I did. I just let it up to these are the places that I need to go, and the places that I need to be in that respect. Because I was able to take that break and that pause, and become a mother. And there's so much you learn from your children that I was able to then apply back to the workforce and stuff too. Because you got to realize your kids don't know anything when they're growing up. You assume they do, but they don't. And that's a lot of times what happens in the workforce too. People assume they know what's in your head, or trying to a way to interact, kind of communicate with them there. So I see that I promise that this be a little bit more interactive. I'll take a little break here. So I'll see if there's any questions real quick.
Still in the service was your husband still in the service when you had your kids, or?
Yeah. So I call him my then husband because, I'll flash forward. We did get divorced. But yes. And he actually served 20 years himself. So he was in the service at that time too.
So both of you were in the service at the same time when
Yep.
you were raising the kids.
Yeah. So anything else? Okay. No, it's all good. Okay. So from there, I got to go, so I'm still in Colorado, and I got to go to Building 1 in Colorado Springs. So that's space, Air Force Space Command building. And I did requirements for Cybers at the time. And again, it was very interesting. I was the only actually there was 5 of us acquisition people in the whole entire building of Building 1. And I'm like, that is such a huge foul. I can't even tell you, because again, most of the operators, they don't understand the business side. They don't understand why when they ask for something and something can't, they don't have anybody to help translate or understand, why is this being like this? Or is I'm asking for is the tech even exist? Because they don't look at that sort of stuff. They just know their pain points and what they were trying to get through and stuff like that. So again, it was kind of we need to bridge this gap more. And so that's all these the things I was thinking in the back of my head. We need to be able to talk to all of the people, the stakeholders that are in there in order to make something successful as we go forward. It's not just, make a requirement, throw it over the fence. The acquisition guys write an RFP or a contract, throw it over the fence to an industry folk, hope those guys make it right, throw it back to the acquisition people who try and deliver it. It doesn't work. I've seen it in spades, and it just gets reinforced to me over and over again in my career that way. And it was very apparent when I saw a lot of the people in Building 1 struggling, good humans, good intentions. It just, that translation of how do I talk about the mission I need to do and the pain points I have in doing it, and getting it to somebody who can understand and translate it into something that eventually becomes a product or a capability out there. So, so from that, I was actually pulled early to go to Air Command and Staff College. So for those of you who don't know, it's intermediate service school. It's very, very competitive. They only send like the top 25% of the service in there. You go as about a major, down to Alabama. Yay, Alabama. So I went to, so my kids were 1 at the time, excuse me, and I pack up, I take the kids with me, and I go to Alabama. My then husband stays in Colorado because we figured with the whole assignment system stuff, if he moves down to Alabama, then he has to stay there 2 years. I'm only going to be there 1 year, the whole joint spouse, blah, blah, blah. And it figured it'd just be easier if he stayed and put in Colorado. I took the kids because if he had to go travel, yeah, he could still do that, blah, blah, blah. But that was actually a place where because of that, so single mom, twin 1-year-olds, school full time, can't miss class because there is no excuses for missing class. It's your job to go do. Very interesting. So time management became very critical and crucial. Doing what actually made sense and not doing the stuff that doesn't make sense. Started learning a lot of those kinds of lessons and stuff there too. But the one thing that struck me the most is where my cousin one time told me she hadn't seen me in 8 years. That's about how long I had been married, because I wasn't myself anymore because of the relationship that I was in. I had kind of lost who I was and what I did with myself in favor of everybody else out there in a lot of sense. And one that was very eye-opening. And not only did it give me the courage to get out of that relationship, but it also gave me the courage to have that in my workspace as well. There's a lot of times when I go look at my career and especially even in the later years, which I'll talk about, that you have to kind of stick up for yourself. And I think as a female, especially, that's something that we struggle with a lot, because we don't want to like rock a boat. We're always there. We're nurturing. We're there for other people. We're always more of the giving versus receiving in that respect. And it was one of those things like, no, I have value. I need to be me. I need to express me. And that was kind of the things that started to give me that courage and confidence to go forward with that there. Now, all that to say too is my then husband, he and I we're good friends. We're just like, we're not good partners. So he's been there, throughout with the kids and everything like that. But it wasn't a thing to be. And so after I finished up Air Command and Staff, moved up to DC because I finally got to become a PEM. I'm like, yay, I get to be a PEM. At this point, though, I thought I was going to be in space because I was already there, right? I had done GPS, I had NSSI, I had done Building 1. I was going to go over and I was going to be a PEM for space. And these folks actually didn't bid on me to go be a PEM for them. I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. So I got into AQI, which does they do some command and control. They do a lot of the IT information system stuff. They do the UAVs are in there. It's kind of like it's almost like everything else gets thrown into AQI. And originally I was supposed to go to one division AQI to work on, it's probably Deems or something like that, which like, thank God I didn't have to work on that. But it was supposed to be more IT-esque or something along that related. But I actually had an 06 pluck me out of there, and based on my record alone, never had met them or anything. And I'm like, I still to this day, I ask her like, what did you ever see in my record? And she's like, you had, she said, you have commitment, you have passion, and I can see that in your record. And I needed somebody for the programs that they were responsible for. So I got to do what they call Bacon. Everybody loves Bacon. It's basically an aerial network aircraft that extends, tactical aerial networks as well as ground and all of this. So I started getting into that world of that command and control and networks and all of that. And I'm like, dude, I'm a mechanical engineer. I don't do ones and zeros, but hey, why not? So worked on Bacon in there, was in there for about a year. And then they pulled me to be deputy div chief for the command and control division that was in there. That was primarily for AWACS, Global Hawk, or not, excuse me, not Global- AWACS, Joint Stars, all of all of the work that was in there. The thing was, is the 06 that I was working with was an operator type. He didn't know acquisition at all, like not even at all. So it relied on me to help run the organization from the acquisition perspective. But he also, he would always joke, he's like, WWJD, like what would Jen do, you know, from whenever he was in meetings on that. So, but I got him up to speed, and he got in a better appreciation for when he needed to go back to folks too on what does this mean between the operator side and the acquisition side. So the so that was really exciting, and at this point, you know, starting to get to be known in the Pentagon, especially with the SAE, the Service Acquisition Executive, and at the time it was going to be some turnover. So I got told I got to interview up to the AQ front office. I'm like, okay, well, this will be fun. At this point, my kids are 3, maybe 4, 3, 4. And I go in to talk to General Shackelford, really, really super guy. And I knew I was going for the junior millicist position for AQ, which is a huge deal. It's like a big stepping stone again to like further responsibilities and getting promoted and all of that sort of stuff. I was like, cool, I can do this. This is like, I do this stuff in my sleep, right? So we're talking like, I got this interview in the bag, it's great. And then he asked me about my hours. And I'm like, when do you need me? He's like, you know, he's like, at least 7 to 7, like every day. I'm like, you've got me that every other week. I cannot do that when I have my kids, because the way that my then husband and I worked it out was I had the kids one week, he had the kids the other week. We just dropped him off at daycare, you know, that kind of thing. So I would pull whatever hours I needed to, but the daycare only opens up at 7:30. You have to pick them up by 5. So there was no way for me to have that job with the hours that was dictated. And I told him, like, this is like, I will be there for whatever, all the work will get done because that's who I am besides, but I can't physically be in the office during those times. He's like, okay, I appreciate that. And needless to say, I didn't get that job, but it was one of those things, like, again, it hurt to some extent because I don't feel like it would have had that same standard in other circumstances or with other applicants, or that people get asked that necessarily. But I appreciate, like, you know, he was kind of honest in that respect too, but I was honest back. It's like, you will have all of me, but this is my conditions in too, and I won't sacrifice those either. So with that though, a couple weeks later, there was a guy in the office who decided to drop his papers earlier than they expected. So another position opened up to be the CAG chief for AQ. And Shackelford's like, Jen, you're taking this job. I'm like, oh, okay. Because that didn't dictate certain hours. I could do some amount of it at home and some of that work and stuff too. But he still remembered, and he still knew he wanted me on his team to do and continue that work. And it just had a better fit for it. Got to learn a lot, got to see a lot, and still progress there. So I'll pause again for a quick second.
Susan, now is your time. Susan, you have a question.
It is perfect timing. Yes. I had put in the chat earlier that you were relating all of these things, that opportunities you had, and it didn't seem like there was any gender unfairness. And then you present this one, and yeah, that wouldn't have happened to a guy. So I am also an American Association of University Women member who has done STEM and STEAM encouragement for young girls since 1991. And the kinds of outreach that we're looking at now targets underrepresented. How do you address that in what you do in your job?
So it's actually interesting because I was actually just telling somebody this the other day. I knew when I was 6 years old that I wanted to be in STEM, STEAM, whatever, because I actually blend I do a lot of artsy crap too. I don't know why my brain's my brain's weird. And really a lot of it was from my mom that gave me the encouragement, because she never said I couldn't do that, even though like I didn't have much friends when I grew up because I was too smart. And even I was the only girl in a lot of my classes because I was in mechanical engineering. Actually, I have a really funny, I don't know if I should tell this story. This is actually at UD. I went to like an orientation, and this is another gender thing too. I went to orientation and they showed us a video or a slideshow because they didn't really have videos back then. And all of the pictures in there were guys. Like there were no girls at all in any of the presentation material that they had. And I'm like, okay, do you guys have any girls that go here? I'm like, I'm all for it. I always grew up and played with guys anyway, so I never really had girlfriends besides. And sorry, this is what my mom calls a Jenny story. I promise I'll get back to you. But the guy was like, oh, I didn't even realize we didn't have any girls in there. Yes, we do have some women. Like there's the fewest are in civil engineering. And it's like, oh, I can understand that. I don't like playing in dirt a whole lot either. Sorry, I joke. The next is mechanical engineering, because most of them were working on cars. Like, okay, I love my car, by the way. The next one, most was electrical engineering. I'm like, I can see that. And then he's like, the most of them though are in chemical engineering. I'm not sure why. I think that reminds them of baking. My mom was pissed. She's like, you're not going to this school. Like, you can't be around these people. This is like atrocious that anybody would actually make a comment or be in that respect. But she always was like, I obviously I did end up going in there. They gave me the most money between the scholarships they had and my RTC scholarships. But it really, a lot of it came from home. I didn't have encouragement from schools or from outreach programs. Like those things didn't exist. I think there was a women in engineering program that Dayton actually did have that I went for like 1 week in school, like during high school, to go with that in there. But it's almost the personal interaction and touch and encouragement that I try and do when I talk and I see people, and it has to happen younger than anybody really. If it's high school, it's already almost too late. If I hadn't had some of the, I used to love, I still love astronomy and all of that. I had a librarian. I read every book in the library, and she would purposely buy me books just for me because I wanted to read more about astronomy stuff. And it's those kind of people who do like those individual actions and kind of give that. And I know it's not easy to mass produce that. It's not easy to like, cookie cutter that either. But to me, that personal encouragement and touch is way more important than a lot of kind of these generic kind of programs that I've seen. I hope that answers your question.
It does. I'm sitting here laughing. I'm the oldest of 4 daughters, grew up in the 50s, and my dad didn't know that we weren't supposed to know how to use all different kinds of screwdrivers and help him finish the basement. Yep. So, and my mom painted the house and did all the yard work and did everything she did and got picked on for that. But yeah, so I have a similar background. Of course, I'm older than you, but yeah. And it's funny you said that because my youngest sister, we thought, amazing. She's a chemical engineer. Okay.
It's all about the baking.
Right. No, enough for me, funny. But yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny. My now husband, like when the kids need something, like they'll go to him first, which is kind of funny. I mean, he's handy, but he'll immediately say, go to your mom. She knows how to solder. Like she solders better than I do, So it's things like that. And just kind of that encouragement. And it's actually to the point, it's really interesting. My kids, I'll diverse a little bit. I think they were in fourth grade. And there was like a coding camp for girls that was being offered at the school. And the one child comes up to me and boys, and they're like, I want to code. Why can't I be in this? I'm like, he's like, well, this isn't fair that you guys get your own and I don't get one. And I'm like, okay, can we take a step back? Why do you think that this needs to exist? And I had to realize too, is like, he's only ever seen me, and like his experience of female in a tech role is me. And to him, it wasn't like, oh, you rock, mom. Like, why would you have to have something that encourages you or sets you apart or like gives you that kind of thing? So I had to tell him like I'm weird again, but there's a lot that's out there that isn't equal, or that people need a safe environment for those, so that they don't feel like they should be or need to be picked on because they have an interest in coding. So then it's like, okay, he got that, the teaching moment. But I'm hoping then with my kids, like if they end up having children, and both genders, even like the encouragement is there regardless of their gender or whatever they identify as. It's there as the support as a human. Like you have a brain, you have value, you have that capacity to give to the community that should be encouraged regardless of anything that's associated with them. So yeah. Any other
Yes,
questions?
and it needs to start young. As you said, the
Yeah.
research is out there at least by 5th grade
Yeah.
before other things happen. So thank you
Yeah.
so much for your comments.
Yeah, no worries.
Daniel, Mr. McLister, you post a question in Q&A. Can you speak out? Your mic is enabled.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, gotcha.
Great.
I'm an old guy that did some of the things you did and saw the battle between acquisition and operation. So my question is, have we made some progress, and can the operators speak to the acquisition people and vice versa?
I will get to that a little bit later in my life. But yes, I'll talk to that too. But yeah, that's a very good question, because it's a short answer. It's still a struggle, but it's getting a little bit better. But I'll talk to some of the things that I did throughout my career to help that too.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. So CAC chief for AQ. At that point, everybody's starting to get their material leader assignments or notions. I'm like, I have no idea where I'm going to go for this, because why would I? Like I said, I've already started to do multiple mission threads, not part of any one community exclusively. And at that point, I got picked up again by another 6. I didn't know who they were either at all, to go to the base IT infrastructure program up at Boston and Hanscom. So I packed up the kids, single mom again, and I take over my ML position, which I lived on base on purpose because they had all the facilities there. I had always lived off base before that, but they had the daycare, they had the school, they had the blah, blah, blah. Because again, I'm like, I just need to keep these kids alive. I need to try and do the best job I can do, and just kind of go forth and press. The and the really super hard thing, there was no support system up there, not for me anyway. I didn't have any family, I didn't have any friends, I didn't know anybody. And it was a hard couple few years of just kind of like slogging it through, doing what you can, and whatnot. So I know everybody has like their own experiences with MLs or with their commands and stuff like that. Again, the big thing I took away from that half of the experience was I am stronger than I think. Sometimes I can do hard, I can manage, I can do things. My kids are still alive, yay. For better or worse there. And I was actually still able to do a good job. The kind of interesting thing from the job itself. So you're learning IT. So base IT infrastructure, 186 bases around the world. We had to outfit them with all of their IT. So the hashtag fix my computer is very real to me. I get it. I understand it. We would always put the networks in at the base level only. That's not the only part of the bigger, broader infrastructure that there is in the Air Force for it, but I was in charge of the base side. But when I get into the job, the guy I took over from, he's an interesting person. Let's just say he didn't do a lot. He's like, we got about 160 bases done, or 150, 130. They were 80% done, something like that. There's not much for you to do around here. You can just, kick up and just like write out your command. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's just not me, So I'm looking at it, and I ask people like, okay, so we get done in the next year. What's next? And they're like, what do you mean what's next? I'm like, do we go back to the first base we were there? Like what's next? And they're like, oh, we never thought, like, how do you not think about that? So then part of me was then, okay, how do I do the strategic roadmap for taking care of? And oh, by the way, they didn't visit a base for 8 to 10 years. So think about like the time the tech that's on the base from the first base that we went to versus, and like, no wonder that people are crying and swirly blue screens of death and all that. Like, there has to be a better way to shorten that down to get tech out and faster to folks and whatnot. And then within that too, the way that they had set up, I still giggle about this too, the way they had set up the contract was that they had them in 2 separate contracts. They did a hardware contract, so the purchase for the hardware, and then they did a separate contract, which is ironically a sole source back to who they bought the hardware from, for all the maintenance and support associated with the hardware. And so what certain companies did, Cisco, they would give away their hardware and then rape the government on the maintenance and the service agreements that they had on the other side. And like, this is not working for me. Like, where's the life cycle management piece of this? Where's the end-to-end integration or the thought process of why? Like, so I canceled all of the, well, actually I didn't cancel. The contracts that were there were still there, but everything going forward, we're doing one full contract. It's for both hardware and for all of the SLAs and the maintenance and the sustainment and all of that sort of thing. And what happened, ironically, Cisco was no longer the cheaper option, go figure, when people actually took the holistic view of what the system was and how it was generated. So then we started pulling in the Cisco lost. Actually, I was one of 9 material leaders. I had an ACAT-1 program in the whole Air Force. And so that actually would lock me into a 4-year job. And at about year 3, or actually year 2, because I'm like, okay, I'm going to be here for a couple more years, 2.5. I'm going to get out there. I've been dedicating all my time to my work and to my kids. I needed some time for me because I was going crazy. I needed some me time. So I actually reconnected with one of my friends. I didn't know we lived on the same dorm floor in college. And I met up with her at a UD basketball game. That was the year they went to the Elite 8. So I went to a watch party in Boston and connected with her, and we ended up like having a lot of fun. I still talk to her a lot. But I also met wonderful man. His name is Andy. He's my now husband. He I just say, yeah, he's good. It was one of those things though that we met in January of 15, and by July of 15 we were married. It was one of those things, like, it kind of is one of those things, you knew he always supported. One of the big things was that in April of 15, I got short-term notice, like, you're going to Air War College. I'm like, oh, well, that's good. So I go and tell, because he had already, that's when Boston had their 189 inches of snow. And he came over to hang out and then never left, kind of thing, because he couldn't leave. And he had basically moved in on March 31st, gave his keys up. April 1st, I get notice I'm going to school, and I go tell him, it's like, it's not April Fool's joke. And he's like, you're getting deployed. I'm like, no. And he's like, you got school? I'm like, yes. He's like, all right, let's go. I'm like, it's in Alabama. And he's like, I've been there before. I'm like, oh, okay. And then, one thing led to the other, and he's like, married. I'm like, okay, fine. And then we end up, hauling and going down to Alabama. He has been the most supportive person ever. He, and I didn't realize how much I needed something like that to be with me until he kind of came along, and he's always been 100%, equal partner. Never, it's actually my first husband told me he never wanted me to make 06 because he didn't think I could be a good mom and a good officer at the same time. Never heard anything like that from my now husband. And so that sometimes you just need that, again, that kind of uplifting and pull there. So so go to Air War College, had a blast. Probably because I didn't do, I did my coursework, but I didn't care about it as much. I did what I needed to do, and I didn't do the stupid stuff that didn't make any sense. Like, where's the value in this? I'm not going to do it. But I still learned a lot, made some great friends. We had time there. From that, went back up to DC. Because at this point I was still in 05. It's pretty much, I hadn't met my 06 board, but if you go to Air War College, again, it's highly selective. The only top 15% go to school there. And I knew, by intents and purposes, I was just in a holding pattern until my 06 board goes. So they put me in joint staff. I was in what they call JIATO. I don't remember what it stands for, but it was missile defense kinds of stuff that they had in there. And again, the only acquisition person in the whole office on the joint staff in the J8 section there, in our section of J8. And a bunch of operators, think THAAD and what's the other crazy one? Patriots, that sort of stuff. Anyway, they put me on global missile defense. Nobody gives a poo about global because they're always worried about the combatant command, and what is being done in their particular combatant command AOR. And I'm like, has anybody ever thought about the fact that, I don't know, Iran and Israel are in two different combatant commands. How are you guys going to talk to each other? How are you guys going to hand off things to each other? How are you, like, nobody, again, thinking of the strategic picture or view about how do you cross different combatant commands. But again, I have no work because nobody does anything with global. And I get the dregs from the guys who were assigned to a specific COCOM when they were too busy or they didn't want to work on that particular project. Just give it to Jen. We'll give it to her to do. And so I spent a lot of time in front of the Dunkin' Donuts in the Pentagon reading books and doing that thing because, again, I didn't have much to do. Eyeballs bleeding. It was it's probably the second worst assignment, I'll be honest, that I had. But I learned a lot. Again, one of the big things. So I finally did get a project that somebody gave me that they didn't want to do. And it had to do with Korea. And they basically had been pitched that if you integrate THAAD and the Patriots, because then, you can protect each other, command and control, blah, 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 blah. And it was only going to be $20 million. Okay. So the COCOM comes back, they submit urgent requests to have it done and evaluated. And so then I go back and I'm like, what are you trying to accomplish? And they're like, well, we want this integrated. I'm like, to what end? Like, for what reason? And they're like, well, so that we can cover more targets. And I'm like, okay, that's a good reason. Have you guys thought about other solutions that could give you that same thing that might be cheaper? They're like, no, we want this. And I'm like, okay. So I went to do some math and I did like it actually turned out where the THAADs were located, because they also wanted to be able to protect the THAADs. Where the THAADs were located, there wasn't anything at the time the Koreans could actually get towards too. So it's like, okay, that's kind of a weak argument because they're not going to take you out. But say you're only get a 17% increase on if you do some of this connectivity that you're talking about, and which nobody had done that analysis to see like how much more protection are you going to have of the different sites. And so then they're like, okay, this Jen person keeps asking all these questions. And so then it's not 20 million, because then we realize the networks in Korea can't handle command and control at the speeds that they need to be able to do to integrate these two things. So you'd have to like outfit the whole country of Korea to be able to redo this. And oh, by the way, the integration work is so much harder than we thought. And oh, by the way, this, that, and the other. And it turned out that the bill got up to, I want to say $750 million by the time they were starting to pull in all of these pieces and parts from the first requirement that said, I want to integrate Patriots and THAADs. And so again, I go back, and this is a little bit with the discussion of like why an acquisition officer can be valuable to an organization, to a thought process, because there's all these unknown unknowns. There's all these things that when you throw a requirement out there, if you just take it verbatim, and there's a lot of acquisition people who just take it and say, I'm gonna do it. You asked for it, without doing some of that critical analysis, or like, what is the outcome or the goal you're actually trying to achieve, not just this particular, particular thing that goes through. So at that point though, I made 06, like all this was happening. And so they actually had to move me. I have no idea what actually ever happened to that whole case, but I put the business case to them of what was going on with it, because then they moved me over to OSD. And so I was working for the DASD for space at that time, as I finally got a mill assist job there to do that for about a year. So I was like, again, I was kind of surprised, like, where were they going to throw me for 06? So, and they put me in space again. Like, I don't do space stuff. I haven't done space in forever. But they're like, fine, this is just mill assist. You're just, babysitting the organization. I'm like, okay, fine. So did that, got up to speed on a lot of the things and projects that were going on there. And then it comes up time for me to be selected for senior material leader. And again, not knowing who or where I was going to go, because I didn't feel like I belonged to any one particular community. In general, I've done everything for all of them. And so it's kind of a big surprise when I got picked up to come here to Los Angeles. And I was going to take over a program called JMS at the time, which is a couple of dirty letters in there to try and fix that. It happened to be JMS was still an OSD oversight program. So I got to see it from the DASD point of view when I was still up at OSD. So I knew what I wanted to do to the program before I even got to the actual office, because I had been prepping for almost a year while I was waiting for my assignment to kind of kick in. And so that's when you mentioned the probably one of the bigger things I guess I might be known for from the thing. I go into JMS, and I always go in, when I go into a new office, I always do interviews with every person that works there, or every government, because you can't always do that with the contractors for multiple reasons, but every government person go in there and have an entrance interview with. And one of the lieutenants I talked to, he thought his job was watching contractors write acquisition documents. And captain I had told me, he's like, I don't think it's worth my even talking to you, because I volunteered to deploy because I'd rather get out of this office than be here. And I had a lot of similar stories like that. And I'm like, okay, people don't know what their job is, and the morale sucks, like super huge. So that was a big challenge, just even besides the fact that nobody delivered anything on JMS in forever. So the one thing I always going through my career too, and a lot of things, and I was starting to really recognize it, especially when they gave me JMS, was they like me to go in to fix things. Most of the jobs that I was in was something was wrong and they needed something corrected, fixed, whatever, brought back on a good path, that sort of thing. And it really was a big challenge with when I first stepped into JMS. So what I did is I let all the contracts expire. I didn't renew any options. It was like kind of in the perfect timing of that. So I canceled JMS by the fact I didn't continue it. And they're like, you can do that? I'm like, yeah, I'm the government. I can do that. And it's like, and well, how do you have authority? Like, you hired me as the program manager. You gave me the authorities the day you hired me. I'm taking them. And again, that part of the mindset people don't always realize or own, which is something else I try and help encourage folks. Like, you have more authority than you have. It's like, do you have the courage to exercise them? So with that, I'm like, hey, there's this great thing called Agile out there. We're going to convert over into Agile. What's Agile? And so we went full bore into Agile. And when I went to Dr. Roper and I gave him the whole plan of what I had done, or what I was cooking up in my brain, because Kessel Run was already established, but they were only about 6 months old or so at the time. But I had been watching them from OSD, or because I'd already been seeing some of the things that was going on, again, synthesizing lots of different trends that were happening within the government or within different pockets of people. How can I pull all that stuff together to make something what eventually became KM? And I told him what I was doing. I didn't ask him what I was doing. I told him this is what's going to make this happen and go forth. And he's like, great, got it. Go forth and do great stuff. Just come up with a cool name. I'm like, okay, because I didn't make up KM at the time. So my now husband and I, we were like brainstorming, and I popped into my brain Kobayashi Maru. Like, so does anybody know what the reference is to Kobayashi Maru? What's the reference?
Captain Kirk.
Yes. Yeah, so it's a training exercise all Starfleet cadets have to go through in order to see how to handle a no-win situation. Which I definitely felt like I was in when I was thrusted into JMS. But the one thing, so Captain Kirk, he comes along and he changes the conditions of the scenario. He basically rewrote the software in order for him to be able to win. And I was like, that's what I want this office to know and realize. Like, it isn't the same. Think about the problem differently. How do you get to where you need to go to win? How do you do software differently? The whole like coding piece kind of tying in there. So you go in so that you can go in and do that. And so like the name was, to me, was perfect of like how to shift the organization in order to get them to rally around a purpose, a vision, something they could be proud of, and actually getting towards the next element of acquisition that never really gets highlighted, but should be a part of cost schedule performance. We have people, but it should also be delivery. We don't deliver something, it doesn't matter. It like if the operators don't want to use it, again, it doesn't matter. So keeping that in the mindset though of like, I'm here to deliver, not just watch a program and follow an acquisition checklist, changes how you actually make decisions on acquisition and how you move forward to talking to people and getting those things through. So that was one of the big thrusts of like Agile focuses all on delivery. How do you get it out there? How do you get decision maker? How do you get information back to make decisions to course correct if you need to? And then back to the point with the question before, it was a whole, I was like, I cannot do this unless I have the operators talking to me on a near daily basis to be able to actually get to them what they want and what they need. And it took a long time because it was because all the operators are like, want to talk to you, and it's like, you guys suck, your acquisition. And I'm like, if you give me 5 minutes, I will give you an hour. Like, I relieve a pain point to your time back. And once they started realizing that and had that trust, and they realized that dialogue actually, then they were asking me like, oh, can I tell you about that? And there was one application we delivered, they're like, ooh, that font size is like a little, they were like offhanded comment, that font size is a little small, it's a little hard to read. And the coder was like sitting right there, and he like punched it up. He's like, is that good? He's like, that would have taken me 6 months to have gotten that change made. He's like, and you did it in like 2 seconds. I love you. So it's part of that trust of like the communication and the people that you need to bring in to get the things done, and then actually doing and delivering back to them so that they know that you can be trustworthy and you're there for their best interests and things too. So that was a lot of the things with KM. There's a lot of lessons, a lot of thing. It was interesting because when I started, obviously nobody ever thought we would do any, like, is a doomed program. JMS was. People have been trying to replace the portions of it for eons and eons. I think they let me do what I was doing because they didn't think it could get any worse. So like, we'll just let Jen try this and we'll see how it goes. And it was, I mean, I did things like the day I write, I canceled Mark, like I'm doing another Mark. And they're like, what do you mean you have to? I'm like, nobody reads them. I've been on air staff and OSD staff. Nobody read. The only people who read them are AQX because they have to collect them. But nobody makes a decision on them. It's old, stale. It gets watered down. Like, there's no value in this anymore. So I challenge people on, like, again, what are you doing that creates value or not creates value to go forward? And it's actually surprising when you push on things a little bit, you see what is actually important to folks. Just relying that it's the same thing that you've done always. Like, anybody tells me like, well, this is the way we've always done it, I was like, you need to leave my aura right now because it's obviously not servicing you anymore. Like, just because you always did it, it's not moving you forward to where you need to go. Not to say that I didn't have a lot of pushback in some ways too. People didn't know what Agile was. People didn't know how to manage or oversee Agile. I'm like, unless you're in the office, you're going to be old dated information. Like, I can't, I'm already like this light years ahead of you, no pun intended. By the time you're even reviewing it again. And so there's a whole, like, how do you manage? And I probably didn't do that well myself, honestly, because when I'd go to air staff or OSD staff, and they were struggling, they didn't know how to talk this. They didn't know how to oversee this. They didn't know, they were feeling threatened because they thought their jobs were gone now because, like, Jen doesn't need us to tell us that she sucks anymore, you know, because I have old information now and she's already this far ahead, and she's already made decisions that I would have maybe told her if I knew what I was talking about, kind of stuff. So I didn't probably manage all of those people very well, because I then had other people trying to undermine me and take it down and get me fired and all of that while I was in KM. Besides, even though we had so much success with actually delivering and giving capability to the warfighter, the people part was always, we got to be kind of a big challenge with that. With that there, like, you know, obviously with KM, there was the data, there was the, we did with that, there was the, I helped write 5000.87, which is the acquisition pathway for software. I helped with congressional language, with the appropriations for software. So there's like a lot of things that I'm super proud of, that I hope helping people that are coming past me to be able to make their lives a little easier, even though it sucked in the moment. A lot of times when I was like physically there, but a lot of it that was there too was the cybersecurity piece. Because one of the other big focuses on it, because I had seen it in a lot of other things, people would bolt on security, right? And I'm like, in KM, we're going to bake it in right from the start. It's going to be part of the pipeline. If they can't pass the pipeline with the security elements intact, it's not going to get pushed to prod. So it changed the mindset of like how they were building and how they were doing it besides. And then they would realize like, oh, this security stuff isn't actually all that super hard. You just have to integrate and balance it with the functionality in there. And it's a symbiotic package. Like if you're, I always tell I called my kids, because by this point I could like actually mother some of the kids that were in my office. I would tell my kids, like, if something from a security perspective, you get hacked or taken, and your software gets taken down, or any of that gets taken down, your functionality just went to zero. You have no ability to do your mission or anything like that anymore. So how do you think about your availability then, in conjunction between cyber and with functionality, in order to keep your system and your mission up and running and going? So that was kind of one of the big focuses there. And so when I was moved up to the CIO office for Space Systems Command, that was a lot of the things that we tried to push within, our cybersecurity sector that we had within the CIO. So that office, when I went to the CIO, was another very toxic environment that I walked into. The previous leadership was very demeaning, demoralized, to the point where one of folks actually had to go in like mental health care for several months because of the trauma that was in the office. So to help clean that, but also the CIO to be more like how industry actually views and sees a CIO. The government side, it's really more about policy making, and it gets very detached from execution or who are doing the acquiring. That's why there's a lot of challenges, I think, on the Air Force side, because it's bifurcated between multiple offices. So I try to bring all that together, doing the IT, the tooling, the cybersecurity, the data, the software, kind of like how all that gets focused around, and ultimately helping the PEOs, because they're my customers, right? You're supposed to be here. That's another thing, like being customer focused and helping relieve their pain points. Like that is my job. That's what I thought my job was as a PM as well. When I was at Kobayashi Maru, it's like, you are my customer. I need to deliver to you. What is it that we need? Let's have the conversation and let's get to where we need to go. And again, that's not where I think a lot of program managers look and take it. And, but it could make us such huge strides in the capabilities we're trying to go and deliver if that customer focus and that relationship actually happens. So going back to that question earlier about like, are we doing that any better from a operator talking to acquisition or the operator's understanding? There's pockets. I think the stuff with KM, they still do talk to their users to some extent. I've been pushing to have the PEOs and then the Spock Delta commanders talk to each other like on a more frequent, consistent basis so that they actually understand. The PEOs can take back, like, have that communication flow of like, hey, are we delivering what you need? What are you trying to get to your mission? And then keeping the eye on like, what's the strategic bigger system of systems as it's kind of going through. They're kind of starting to, but it's still very stovepiped, in my opinion, at least on the Space Force side that I've been able to see lately. I think until we can get over some of those hurdles, and it's not about them sitting next to each other, seeing each other write code, or like it's more about that interaction in the conversation to understand what is the pain point, not just throw things over the fence or read a capabilities document and assume you know what it means. And even the way you write requirements, it should be about the effect you're trying to create, not integrate THAAD and Patriots. What is it you're ultimately trying to get at? And I think a lot of times people don't know. They don't know what the realm of the possible is. And unless you have those conversations and take those minutes to breathe and have that, we're still spiral around or kind of walk with their chickens with a head cut off, in some respect to that. So, all right. I'm going to pause there again. Is that like pretty much my career as it goes through? But any questions? I know I promised you guys I was going to be more interactive, but sometimes I get excited, and I do appreciate the questions that you guys did have and stuff too.
Going back to, I think it's great that you had kids. Kids, of course, are wonderful. Previous generations, I'm good friends with General Retired Ellen Polakowski, and she tells a story about how Wilma Rudolph said, well, you can't have kids and be successful in the Air Force. And I know things have obviously changed since she was, but I'm kind of curious your perspective, like, how did you feel about it? Because there probably were still people saying that to you. And of course, from a quality of life and with family being important, you kind of feel like, no, this is the right thing to do. But, I'm kind of curious about your thoughts in terms of people, because I think there's still some folks that don't have a career instead of having kids. And so what your perspective on that?
No, I know. So there's kind of a couple things. So my kids have taught me a lot about myself, and I still struggle a lot of times, like whether or not I'm a good mom, and stuff, because I know I'm not a normal mom, or at least not what people portray as, the gals who can be stay-at-home moms. I have like the utmost respect. I am not a stay-at-home mom by any stretch. My kids, they know they know when I need to go back to work, like, Mom, you're too cranky, go away, but I also think that the stuff that from my career side brings into them perspectives that they never would have had if I had been a more traditional mom in that respect. I will say I do always doubt, whether I did good on either front or enough on either front. But I like to chalk that up to being a human thing than just, the societal pressures of it per se. It's actually interesting too, because and this kind of goes back to one of the other comments or questions. I never felt so undervalued and undermined and hitting a glass ceiling as I did when I made 06. A lot of times throughout my whole career, I was like, either I was encouraged or they let me go. They knew I was to let Jen go do. I never back if that was people like my leadership protecting me and I didn't realize it or know it at the time per se. But like when I made 06, and there was a couple of things, like I had one individual. It was not pretty. I mean, this was like an air staff level person who had his sights on and did everything imaginable to try and get me fired. And I knew it. And I would go to my boss. I'm like, dude, I need help. And they're like, you can figure it out. I figure out a lot. I do a lot without you ever knowing or needing or any of that. And I don't ask for help unless I really need it. And that was very demoralizing because your leadership should be there and shouldn't and foster that. And so then I felt like a crappy officer then, like, how can I not be getting this stuff done if they're expecting I should get it done? I'm like, this is not a normal environment. You know, this is not a normal person. I can handle a lot. I have handled a lot through my whole life. I'm a girl. we learn to suck it, you know, in a lot of ways and just take it. And like, this is not, and I'm asking. And so it's, but, and it, while it's still is still a thing, you know, obviously I can't forget that time, and it had a lot of emotional drain out of me. I look at it as like, it gave me another like, how do I synthesize with everything? Like the next thing I do, how am I going to account for that piece, or how am I going to talk to people differently, or how do I be at peace with myself when these things are like, and that's one of the things, like, so I did start my own company when I retired. And part of it was because I was like, I'm going to pick and choose the problems I want now, you know, and if you're drama, I don't want you, and I like you, so let me help you out. And I wanted to be able to help everybody out, you know, in that respect. So just even my path going forward in that was shaped a lot with some of the things of, like, you know, being a mom, because now I can be stable. I can stay in LA. My kids are happy because they can get through high school. So I'm doing some good, I get some good mom points there, right? But then I also, from a career perspective, like, I can still do and shape and be the things I want to. So it's also helped me kind of navigate to the point that I'm in now too. I hope that
How did
answers.
you decide on the name of your company? I'm kind of curious about
Yeah, no, so just like when my now husband and I were talking about trying to name Kobayashi Maru, we sat down and brainstormed again, because, like, okay, we gotta get a name for this. And I know I threw out something, I don't remember what it was. It must have sucked though, because my husband's like, what? But he's like Plan Z. I'm like, he's like, well, you know, because people go through Plan A and then Plan B, and then I'm like, they just need to come to you. You're the last one. They just Plan Z. Just go there. So that's kind of where it came from.
So I have a question. So it seems like later on in your career, you got scouted for opportunities. I'm wondering. Oh, hello?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm wondering, like, earlier in your career, how did you, like, navigate and receive those promotions, and basically just really build up a reputation as to what you wanted to be?
Yeah. So it's actually interesting. So one of the things as a colonel in the military, you one of your additional duties is to sit on promotion boards or school boards, or, you know, those kinds of things like that. And you get to read hundreds and hundreds of records and evaluate all of the records of the people that you see and score them. And the scale is from 6 to a 10, 6 meaning this way below average, and 10 meaning like the second coming of Christ, right? And so every time, sorry, again, this is another little Jenny story. Every time I was sitting on those boards, which I volunteered for those every chance I could, because again, that was another way for me to help and shape and mold folks. Because if I saw a person, like, you know, they were like, hey, maybe these guys need encouragement, or these guys are on a really good, like, I would try and reach out or talk to, or at least when I mentored other folks, like, I would know the lay of the lands and stuff. So, but every time I would go to those boards and stuff, I would reread my own records to be like, I just read this kid's record and they are so much more put together than I ever felt I was. Like, how would I rate my record to them, right? And interestingly, when I look at my lieutenant records and my first captain or two, I would have given myself a 6.5 if scoring that record. Like, I was not probably anybody would have thought to put me on a path anywhere. That's my own assessment of how I had it. It wasn't really until I got to GPS. Now realize I didn't come to LA because of my own merit. It's because my then husband was an astro engineer and he wanted to work in space. And so, and nobody volunteers to come to LA. I was like, especially two captains, they're like, it's hard to get captains to come here because a lot of them are starting families or like it's expensive, blah, blah, blah. So I was pulled to LA because of him, basically, which was fine. I was like, I liked space. I wanted to be an astronomer when I was little. So I was kind of getting back to some sort of roots. And it wasn't until I was told to interview for the GPS exec, which I have no idea, again, why or how. My name was tossed up. I think, well, actually, probably I do. Nobody wants to volunteer for that stuff either. Usually you have to throw your name. Everybody throws their names in, or every division has to throw a name in, and mine got thrown in, right? But I go and I interview with the 06 there. And I'm like, and I told him, like, yeah, I'd be interested in it. I kind of, would like to know and understand, more strategically what's going on. And like, I think I can help here. And I'm like, we're talking and all this and the other. But I told him like my timeline was like, I wanted to work in this job another 1 year and then go to, and then be exec, the following year, not this 1 year. Because execs are only 1 year job because they burn you out. And I'm like, okay. And it's like, all right, I'm probably not getting picked, but I had a good conversation. At least now the 06 knows who I am, blah, blah, blah. And I get back to my desk, and 2 minutes later, and the announcement comes that I was picked as the exec. I'm like, huh, well, that's interesting, because I was getting ready to work on my one project. And that job and the chance that colonel took on me is what I think flipped my career. Not because I didn't have the ability, because I did when I was that lieutenant and captain. But if you remember, like, I was in the lab in an office that no lieutenant should be in. I was at school, but I had to pretend I was still in the lab because I went backdoor to school. I was at Barksdale, which was like a horrid assignment, and there was nobody ever pushing or promoting me there either. So it wasn't until I got to GPS and had somebody like realize I had some value and worth that, and then it was me. My mom always, because I always would struggle, like, are they picking me because I'm a girl or because I'm qualified? And my mom's like, that's on them. Why they choose what you do with it, it's on you. And so that's why it's like, any door that they open, I kick it wide open and do what I need to do. And so from then on, it's always, I do the best job in the job that I'm in. And I would go and I actually heard a phrase. It actually was really I kind of like, I heard it the other week that somebody said, any job that my boss is interested in fascinates me. And so like anything you can do to make them good and anticipate what they need. And again, thinking of that bigger strategic picture than just like your tactical myopic sort of thing helps them. I had one boss who, I didn't know about this until, later when I got promoted, and he got up and said a couple of words. I think it was on my first day, and I get a problem, and he was all like, and I read the email. I'm like, it's my first day. I don't know the dynamics of this office. I know what I should do, or like, I have an inkling of what I want to do with this problem to solve it. And I waited, like, should I go talk to should I ask for permission or just do it and just tell them about it later and get yelled at if it, blows up? And I'm like, I'm not going to bother. I know they're busy, there are SESs and stuff. Like, I'm just going to go do it. And I did it, and I let him know after the fact. And he was so grateful because he was tired of everybody asking him for every little decision. And that's why I said, like, take ownership. They put you in a job for a reason. They want you to do the work for a reason. And so when you're always going back, it's like those people who go back and ask about everything sometimes don't get noticed as much as the people who take the ownership and responsibility and then like move things forward, or at least, now I'm not saying go behind their back and don't let them know and, all of that sort of thing. Cause like I said, I let my boss know, like, hey, this is the problem. I did this. I'm just letting you know if somebody comes and yells at you later, so you can yell at me later. Which he was a good courtesy, right? But at least he could see I could take initiative. They knew they could toss me anything and I would take care of it and just run with it and stuff too. So does that help? Yeah. Sorry for the Jenny story, but
Any question here? Yep. For folks online, Susan, Dan, everyone, and more question? If not, I'll fill in a question. I actually two questions. One
Okay.
is about the woman professional. One is about the aerospace cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Actually, Mary just mentioned General Ellen Polikowski. I met her a couple of years ago. I remember in her speech, and afterward, I also talked to her personally. But she was talking about, when she and her husband, initially kind of same rank, and gradually it kind of split
Mm-hmm.
different track. And her husband was very supportive and those kind of things. And you just also mentioned, sometimes you face some people, they're not friendly, they were looking at you. Actually, it happened to some of the minority people as well. Do you think in those kind of scenario, so did you get enough support in Air Force or surrounding, like anybody give you any kind of support? The reason why I mentioned it is that, for AIAA, we have Mary Lee and we have, of course, Ellen for General Polikowski, and we have Sandy Magnus and many great women professionals. So our women went out to empower other women and girls, provide certain resources, but it may not be enough. So how do you think? Did you get enough resources to support you, or you feel you would hope that at that time you get a much stronger support?
Um, it's actually it's not an easy question to answer because I think I had pockets of it at times. Actually, one of my really good friends right now, she was in 06 and I was a major, and she always kind of was looking out for me to some extent, but I didn't always know or take her up on it until more recently than anything. I never really had mentors per se because I never really clicked with folks, but me personally, this is me personally, I mentorship programs and I mentor people all the time too. So it's, I fully believe in all that. Again, I think I internalize and think a whole lot. And so, and for right or wrong, that's just the way I process and brain. So sometimes it's not always, um, how I work through things to verbalize or have, some of that. There are times when I go and do and whatnot too. I actually had a friend, because my then husband, at AFPC, they were trying to assign him better than assign me. And my friend who was at another friend at AFPC, he was like, no, Jen's the one we need to track and move. And so he helped push me. So there's like little tiny things kind of throughout. But like from a mental health perspective, no, never really anything there. Even when I've tried to seek it out, like it can be a hot mess sometimes trying to get some of that support. When I've gone to leadership before, and say like, I need help. I don't know how else to more explicitly explain this to you, and get shot down, being in, yes, I've been in toxic environments. I've been in very supportive environments, so it just, part of it just depends, I guess. But again, for me, and I don't know if this is because I wasn't part of any one community specifically, like I never felt like I had, the parachute, or anything like that, per se. But again, I think I would not trade any of that though, to be honest, because I love everything that I've been able to experience and how I can synthesize and bring all that tactical down to strategic down to the tactical, and like how these, like my brain works where I can see how all that goes. And I wouldn't have known that unless I had seen aircraft and munitions and space and command and control and missile defense. And like, so when they talk JATC 2, I'm like, yep, I totally know how all that can work and float together because I've done all of those pieces that they're trying to pull together, right? But does that help answer your question?
Yes, very good. Yeah,
Yeah.
and actually, we have been trying to, mentor or try to be supportive to woman or girl engineer who want to go. We have a lot of women students, young professionals. They can look up to you and Mary Lee and seeking for certain kind of advice or
Yeah. No, I'm always open. Anybody can always and I'm more than happy to talk and chat and any of that stuff. For me, it's always like this is just me. Like I've been me all my life, So if when
Yeah.
people are like, "Oh my God, you've done crazy things or amazing things," I'm like, I was just being me the whole time.
That's
Like I
right.
don't know how else to be. And I think sometimes when people like start to feel they're trying being something else, and they're not following their spidey sense or they're not doing that. So anyway, it's, to me, it's always funny when people are like, "Oh my gosh, you're like so amazing." I'm like, I'm just Jen,
Yeah.
So
You are Jen, exactly. Yeah. And one thing you just said, your mom asked you, is this they pick you because you are a girl or because you're capable? Actually, sometimes we um, reach out and try to kind of show our women professionals, this confidence or thing. And sometimes we did, get some kind of feedback similar to, you say, are you doing this woman professional thing is because you are kind of think women's or girls need to be protected or something like that. No, I just told them no, it's not because I understand, they don't want to be feel that way that because they were successful because they are woman or girl. We definitely don't want that. We want to
Yeah.
give a message. Men and women are equal. You are capable, then you have no ceilings. You can.
Well, that's where it's like, and I think a lot of the language, it's gotten better, but it's not there. Like, women still get asked, how do you balance being a mom and being an officer or like a professional? And I know, like, it doesn't bother me. I'll answer, but I don't know if I also flip it to say life work balance instead of work life because it puts an emphasis and focus a little bit differently. But it's like, until we can stop asking girls exclusively that or start asking boys that as well, then there's always still that divide. Like, why are you assuming, like, by asking that, you're assuming that they can't to some extent, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
So, yeah, it's just going to take some more time. And like I said, hopefully I've taught my kids enough that for them, it's not anything that it's like a, well, duh, of course girls can code. Why would they need their own special camp? Things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to mention, AWA, our former executive director, Dr. Cindy Magnus, was a woman professional and also astronaut. And we have Mary Lee here, you here, and Queen Shotwell. Yeah, we have, they just say, but we want to show, this AWA, this equality.
Yeah.
People and more need help from you, more people. And the second question is about cybersecurity because recently I saw the news. It's about Space Force. It's not secret. It's open news. You say a company called Sadaro.
Okay.
Sadaro wins Space Force contract to develop spacecraft digital twins. It's about a mission called ISAM.
Okay.
Of course, people are putting a lot of focus on digital twins, but that also expose, to a lot of cybersecurity issues. And you are the perfect combination because your background is aerospace engineering and you're doing cybersecurity. So, and this is given to the small business contract. So I understand that people want to encourage more small business, and now you're doing how do you think this versus like in-house? Maybe this is say this to Air Force AFRL, and they just give it out. Orbital prime program.
Yeah.
So why don't Air Force or Air Force Research Lab or do something yourself? If you contract outside, then how much you have to put extra effort to make sure the cybersecurity of those digital twins can
yeah. Okay, so there's several different things to unpack there, right? So especially in the digital realm of things, when you're talking about IT or like digital engineering sorts of, and I would challenge people like, what are you trying to use digital engineering for? It's been a buzzword way too much. People don't even know what they're trying to digitize or why they're trying to digitize it and stuff. And so they go after it. And again, what's the outcome you're trying to achieve? And is this the right path for that to go after? But when you're talking IT software, industry is so far ahead of the government, and have taken so many more advances than, so that if the government tried to build everything now that industry's already done, not only would it take us a good 8-10 years to catch up to where industry is today, but then in those 8 to 10 years, industry would have jumped ahead of us besides, right? So why not leap into leveraging industry now and then working and shaping with them as a partner to get to where the government can start to catch up on some of the deficits they have in those kinds of ones and zeros systems, right? With that though, I'm a big proponent of buy, if you can't imagine, like buy as much as you can, like use that stuff to propel you, get you going through. Problem is that most government don't know how to do those contracts, because there's still a lot of industrial age mindset on acquisition and not what a digital age acquisition needs to look like. And as a result, the contracts are in a way that doesn't allow you to move forward or at a pace or in a relationship contract versus a, I'm trying to remember the other term that they had. The standard contracts, the old kind of throw over the fence. Here's an RFP with a PWS and like supply supply is not the right word either, but you see what I'm saying, right? Until they can get into like what that partnership and relationship role of a contract is, which is hard language to try and create. It's going to be a little difficult. Part of the things I did at KM though is I blended the teams together. So I had government folks with contractors to make something. And so say you have a product team of like 10 folks, right? 8 are coders, you got a designer, you got, whatever, you got your product owner, blah, 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 blah. Some of them could have been a government coder. Most often I had a government designer. It's not that I mirrored and had a contractor designer on the other side, because then nobody knows who's in charge. But they all were working together commonly to deliver, so they understood, the pieces and parts that go through. That's a whole other skill set the government doesn't necessarily have, and I was trying to grow with KM to kind of foster that mentality and mindset. But until there's like, I had that lieutenant who's like, I just watch contractors write acquisition documents. He had no skin in the game. He had no like understanding of what was actually going on in those documents. And so until you get, again, some of that ownership in there and shape that contract through to do that, there's that piece of it that's going to make it harder to propel forward. Now, the other thing is that those contracts also have to be like hardball. Like the government is going to have to be like, this isn't working, we're done. And be flexible enough to where you've created an ecosystem, or the system of systems you can absorb that, and you have that flexibility automatically in there to where you pull in the best of breeds for whatever pieces and parts that you have, and then kind of progress forward. And from a security perspective, and this is a lot of the things I was trying to push when I was CIO, bring us and the security people in before you even start doing an RFP, because you have to have those kinds of comments, and that expectation is part of the solicitation right from the start. Because if a company cannot be accredited, or their product cannot be certified and get an ATO or whatever the heck you want to call it, then they should not be considered. And until that company gets into that status, sorry, you're not going to be able to get the government work. We have an obligation to secure our systems in a certain way. So I would tell people all the time, like, if you're hosting at IL2, I'm an NSS system. I have to be at IL5, IL6. If you can't be there, then I can't use you. You might have the best tech in the whole world, but unless you can work and be secure with everything else, I'm sorry. And that's the honest truth that people have to have, instead of saying like, oh, you're great tech and we'll figure it out, or we'll bolt it on, or we'll take the risk. I'm like, okay, but then why are you like, why, so again, that there's multiple facets to it to kind of get to the point that you're saying. And there's some great small businesses out there who've done a lot and are secure and are competent, and we need that talent besides, because we don't have enough of it in the government writ large either.
Because a lot of folks like in JPL or Meredith's company, Aerospace Corporation, have been wonderful jobs, for aerospace thing, and also they are doing also digital twins. So that's very important question.
Mhm.
Issues.
Yep.
Topic. Yeah. So any more questions? Any folks online? Actually after the event, Jane will stay a little bit here for with the lunch and Mary Lee. So if you have any question, welcome to stay, enjoy the coffee, and chat with us. So
Yep, thank you.
since everybody has no questions, so let me see. Yeah, so we have appreciation certificate to present to thank you. Thank you.
Oh, so sweet. AIAA LA, Las Vegas. We're always very appreciative of all the speakers that we get. Thanks for supporting the session, and especially now coming off of August, which was celebrating Women's Month and everything. So we're really glad to have you talk about your career, and it certainly was very varied, and you know about a lot of stuff. So I'm sure it's going to help you in your new
Appreciate it. Thank
role
you.
as CEO for Plan Z. So to you,
Awesome.
thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Thank you.
We actually have one for Mary Lee too. Thank you for your leadership in the Women's Professional Program and Women Equality Day event. Sorry, we cannot do it last month, but today we still continue. We'll continue to do more. So we need your leadership. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so folks, this concludes today's presentation event. It's really wonderful. So we'll continue to for this type of activity, and we'll continue to work with Jane and AIAA put aerospace cybersecurity as a top priority. As I mentioned to Mr. Steve Lee is a lead in AIAA national effort, and Mary's company is also doing a wonderful job. You will know you across street. Okay, so we have lunchbox here. So for the speaker and Mary Lee, and the rest of you, please stay and network with us. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye. This is good.